Hi, good morning. Glad that you can make it. My name is Joanna Nelson, and I'm with the New Mexico Economic Development Department. Can everyone hear? Okay? All right, great. And we're really excited that you could be here today. We are thrilled to be working on opportunity zones around the state and working with so many great partners. If you look around, we've got some great representation from organizations that are doing work to help support opportunity zones, and so we hope that this day will be really useful and valuable to you. We've got some great speakers here today that'll be sharing their expertise, so really hope that you can utilize this day. Before we get started, I did want to mention that a few things. We sent out the agenda, I think, on Friday, so you should have the agenda in your email. We will post the presentation online. We weren't able to do that. If you've noticed, the Wi-Fi is not really connected here, so I'm using a hotspot. You're welcome to use that if you'd like. But we'll send out the presentations. We'll also upload those to the website. We are recording parts of the presentation, and we'll put those on our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel called, I think it's New Mexico Economic Development Department. You can just search that. Also, just to let you know, as far as how the progression of the day will go, we have 3 speakers. And they're going to speak for about 40 minutes each, 45 minutes, and then we'll allow questions if you have questions. This is the only mic that we have, so you will have to shout your questions, and we can relay it up to the microphone. And then we'll have lunch at 12 o'clock, and that'll be in the back left corner. And that's thanks to New Mexico Partnership. We're working with them on this initiative. So is Kristen here? Kristen Gamboa? Where is Kristen? Oh, there she is with New Mexico Partnership. So thank you. Thanks for the sponsorship and providing the coffee. That's really important at this time of day. With that being said, after lunch, we will give a brief overview of what we're working on with the state. And then we're going to close the day with Cabinet Secretary Keys will be here from the New Mexico Economic Development Department, and she's going to be announcing an exciting initiative. So we hope that you stick around. And then we'll have a few breaks. Feel free to step outside if you need to take a call. There are bathrooms, if you've noticed, through these doors and to the left. We will get started. So, and I do want to challenge people that if you keep a tally of how many times we say opportunity today, we'll see what we get up to. And I'd really encourage you, if you have any excellent synonyms for opportunity. We say that word a lot in our department, so I think I've exhausted thesaurus.com. So please give us some alternatives. But we're really excited, and so let us know if you need anything while we're here, and we'll get going. So I do want to introduce our first presenter, and that's John Clark. He is our New Mexico Economic Development Deputy Cabinet Secretary, and he was previously working for the New Mexico State Legislature as the Chief Economist, and he served with the National Conference of State Legislatures, working with legislative staff across the country on economic development issues and analysis of incentive programs. So he's a perfect fit for our department, and we're really, really excited to work with him. He is a native of Albuquerque and a proud alum of UNM's Anderson School of Management. And John has really been instrumental in this initiative and working on opportunity zones. So please welcome John Clark.
Thank you so much, Johanna, and thank you and good morning. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here so early in the morning. It's the last week of August. It's going to be a hot day. I'm glad you were all able to join us, though. And thanks to the New Mexico Partnership providing everyone coffee this morning. It's incredible to see so many groups represented here today. I'd actually love to start by saying a show of hands to see who's here from different types of groups. So if you're with an economic development agency, raise your hand. Awesome. If you're with a local or tribal government, raise your hand. Awesome. What about a state or federal agency? Yep, got some back there. What about a business owner? Many of you, awesome. And what about a nonprofit organization? Yep, quite a few of those as well. Awesome, thank you so much. This is a wonderful example of so many people from groups across the state coming together to see how New Mexico can move forward. And I'm so glad to see that this is a priority for so many of us. It's wonderful to be with all of you here today. Thank you again for coming here and making this a priority. I know you all have very busy schedules. Over the last 8 months, we've received a lot of inquiries about opportunity zones. There's a lot of buzz around the state and around the country about opportunity zones, and people trying to figure out what they are, how they work, how they can use them in their community. We've received a lot of questions in our office, and we've gotten a lot of questions about how they can be used, and especially what is the state doing to promote them. So you'll hear a lot more about that today. We've been hard at work with a lot of our partners to research the ins and outs of the program and to bring back the important information and answers to you today. And we hope that we can now utilize this incentive as effectively as possible and be a leading state in the country for opportunity zone investment. People are right to have questions and be anxious about the program. It has the potential to be an extremely impactful tool by bringing in dollars for development projects, improving infrastructure, stimulating business growth, and stimulating expansion and jobs. It can help fill in pieces of the funding puzzle and be that push that gets a project over the finish line. The process of developing a project in an opportunity zone and finding an investor might feel overwhelming, but hopefully what you hear today will help ease that process. Please remember that others in this room are a wealth of knowledge and resources, and they're here to help. Look around and try to make connections today. Today's forum is a chance to learn more, not just from the fantastic presenters that we have here today, but from each other. Take time to network and share information and ideas. We're really excited that you're here. We're thankful to our presenters, and we're thankful to the New Mexico Partnership for sponsoring this event, and we're thankful to Cabinet Secretary Alicia J. Keys and Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. And I'd also like to recognize staff from Senator Tom Udall's office here today. We have a lot to cover, so please stick around. After lunch, we will be sharing with you the state's initiatives, and our Cabinet Secretary will be unrolling a unique way that our state is going to take a lead in supporting projects in opportunity zones. It's going to be a unique way in the country for New Mexico to take the lead in promoting opportunity zones, and you won't want to miss it. So New Mexico is off and running with an economic development tool that can change the face of many neighborhoods. Let's start today by taking that first step to see what that looks like. The speeches are short and the coffee is strong, so let's get going.
Hello everybody, my name is Ryan Eustace. I work for the Economic Development Department. I am pleased to introduce our first presenter from the Milken Institute. So if you guys don't know anything about the Milken Institute, understand this, that they were one of the first movers and shakers when it came to opportunity zones. They did the first project that really helped shape kind of the rules and regulations that came out and that have been continuing to form. The Milken Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan economic policy think tank. They work on building meaningful lives by leveraging the expertise and insight gained through research and the convening of top experts, innovators, and influencers from different backgrounds and competing viewpoints. Our presenter's name is Matt Horton. He is an associate director of the Milken Institute Center for Regional Economics and California Center. In his capacity, he interacts with government officials, business leaders, and other key stakeholders in directing statewide programming. As many people have said, you guys are surrounded by a wealth of knowledge. I can't recommend enough that during the networking time you get a chance to meet with Matt from the Milken Institute and pick their brains to see how things are operating and how they're looking at it from a national level, regional level, city level. They've done a ton of work and have been a huge partner for the Economic Development Department, helping us walk through different initiatives as well as looking at ways to study this program to make sure that we are getting the biggest bang for the buck. So without further ado, Matt Horton.
Wow. I'm going to do my best telepromptering from the computer here. Well, thanks everyone. A real honor to be here today. And sorry about my voice. I feel like I'm fighting off a Southwest plane flight cold, so we'll get through it though. And I wish I could take credit for all of that hard work that my colleagues have done. The Milken Institute is separated into a number of different centers. As was mentioned, I again work at our Center for Regional Economics, where we focus on like the local level economic community development process, jobs, the health and strength of local economies, housing production, and things like that. I'm focused a lot on housing policy as a means to increase and access to and development of housing, what the future of work is going to look like from a labor market standpoint, and innovative financing strategies for infrastructure and resiliency solutions. My colleagues, on the other hand, have done a lot of work on the monetary side of what an opportunity zone framework look like, and they work out of our Center for Financial Markets in DC. But I think, and when in close collaboration with them, that where the rubber meets the road here on opportunity zones conversation is really at the local state level in terms of devising strategies and frameworks that will support development and aspirational goals that really reflect community character. We'll get into a little bit of that, but just a bit of a primer here. This is adapted from something I wrote a bit ago, but judging by the frequently quoted numbers on the health and strength of the U.S. economy, at least up until lately, the post-recovery U.S. economic performance continues to make gains. But the impressive economic recovery and output hide shrinking opportunities for millions of residents across the country, although highways jobs are increasing in high-tech and knowledge-based and entertainment centers across the country, cities like San Jose and Oakland and San Francisco and the Bay Area, Los Angeles, New York, even Denver. Much of the nation's labor force make do with low wage and often low skill employment. When a higher than average cost of living, including rising housing costs, forces some into really stark economic decisions across the country. And that should ask us, or should propel us to ask questions about how did we get here? Well, we know that housing construction has kind of fallen off. Housing and infrastructure investment has kind of fallen off a cliff, if you will, and it's kind of borne out in report cards that we get about public spending and who's bearing the brunt of infrastructure spending. More and more in terms of who's bearing the brunt of diminishing returns from the Federal Highway Trust Fund or other traditional sources of infrastructure financing. The U.S. labor participation rate is not all the way recovered from post-recovery recession indicators. And the future of work is happening right now with tremendous disruption going on in terms of automation and the jobs that are being supported in our communities across the country. This means, up into some estimates, about 40% of U.S. workers are at risk of losing their work or jobs because of automation here up and coming. I mean, this seems to indicate that on some level the education system has failed to keep pace with demand for skilled laborers, especially in more rural markets and cities and states across the country. And again, we've neglected really broad-based, not just in our investment in our housing supply, but in our infrastructure capacity. So when we start to take a look at what rebuilding an educational and social and physical infrastructure requires, we look at a multi-pronged effort, really starting with state and local governments who are bearing the brunt of that burden. especially in terms of trying to figure out more housing solutions, whether that's capital A, affordable, or subsidized, or more workforce, that 80 to 120% AMI, housing class, appropriate and adequate housing for our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers. And the rural housing crunch is the housing challenge that we hear so much on the coast, like in California, is really moving inland because of a number of factors, whether that's lack of supply or people aging in place more and more often, but more and more young people obviously living with their parents. So what we're trying to see here from an opportunity zone approach is, we can just blast through these. Again, that's just trying to take a look at some of the dynamics that are shaping affordability and cost of living indicators across the country. Really, I think what typifies us most is the percentage of folks who are cost burdened and what that has effect on our local economic performance. So when opportunity zones emerged as this community development and economic development really toolkit, we kind of take a look at it as, the federal government tax overhaul enables investors to defer capital gains on funds invested in designated communities, which is great, obviously. But the opportunity zones are just really one path forward that relies on private capital to bear the cost. So the program is designed, everybody's kind of familiar with Opportunity Zones 101, kind of the nuts and bolts of how the program is structured. I'll run through it real briefly. The program is designed to attract investors holding, by some estimates, up to $6.1 trillion in unrealized capital gains, according to the Economic Innovation Group, to draw that investment to the thousands of opportunity zones and across the nation's communities. State and local leaders must decide where they are willing to compromise, though. This is a competitive process. That means balancing taxation, other rigid land use policies, and strong environmental protections against access to private capital to provide the affordable housing, jobs, business growth, and infrastructure needs that we kind of just went through. But the clock is ticking. We were all eagerly anticipating the revised rulemaking document that made it a little bit clearer for operational businesses, which is exciting and really broadens the deal flow or project pipeline possibilities there. But this typically, from a framework standpoint, I think, will look at it, additional possibly tax incentives to offset the typically low returns provided for affordable housing investments, just one example. Leaders must look beyond the traditional transactional dynamic we think of investing in economic development locally, and instead focus on the benefits of addressing the needs of the millions of people living in the nation's opportunity zones. We think that's a good starting point where we can begin to foster what could be more of an increased economic equity perspective or an asset-based economic development perspective at a local or state level. But I think some of us have heard the news around partisanship and fear of displacement around opportunity zones and concerns about the public sector inefficiency, ostensibly, that will make some people skeptical that the public-private cooperation involved here in opportunity zones investments will contribute to more inclusive or an equitable economy as end result. They shouldn't be. By aligning state and, as we'll see a little bit further on, by aligning state and local incentives with financing tools, we think investors and civic leaders can focus on the economic needs of residents. Regardless of how the regulation unfolds at the federal level, we think, again, just to highlight this point, state and local jurisdictions should begin setting standards as some, I think, we've seen done. Who was I? Ryan, what city were you with, Ryan? Santa Fe. I think there's lots of good models that we're already seeing, especially in New Mexico. I think you're a lot farther in this process in terms of developing local prospectuses, and I'd like to hear more about that today. But ideally, this whole framework will generate a pipeline of projects, at scale, guaranteed or shovel-ready, that achieves the expected level of profit or return from the investor's perspective, but also delivers the tangible community benefits that we hope to see here, those benefits that neighborhoods and communities need to thrive. In this sense, the role of state leaders primarily rests in developing a framework that supports and insulates a local pipeline, which we'll show a nice chart later when we get into some of the nuts and bolts. But participants can use the framework to manage all aspects of deal flow, coordinated at local and regional and state levels, by aligning incentives and funding structures and local capacity to help local jurisdictions build marketable project portfolios. Leaders should reflect on the type of economy we hope to build. Our economic health will hinge on embracing inclusive development strategies that lead to high-paying jobs, adequate housing, and sustainable infrastructure goals that opportunity zones we think can help achieve. We can take a look at why we think some of those things. Again, just some context here in terms of what the Opportunity Zone program is ostensibly set up to help support. Just a real brief rundown of that point we made earlier about the timing being an issue here. So qualified Opportunity Zone funds and money that's dedicated to projects is up against a 10-year hurdle at the end of this year, which doesn't mean we still can't get really great projects in return, or even Congress to revisit the timeline, but we are looking at least a rigid timeline right now. Just a brief kind of map of how the tax benefit works at different levels and how it supports a more patient capital framework. Obviously, a brief overview here of where opportunity zones are, and the huge cluster of opportunity zones in the Southwest region is of typical interest, I think. I think a lot of the necessary players to help support the framework that we just kind of laid out here are in this room. I saw a few foundations back there that there's a slide down here how we think, and they can help in terms of generating community benefits and community engagement from a philanthropic standpoint. One other key area here, and we'll keep referencing back to this, I'm sorry you don't have it in front of you, is looking at some of the assets that are in place around the nation that can help support an opportunity zone or an asset-based economic development strategy. Some of those being your MPOs and Council of Governments, especially from a data warehousing standpoint. I used to work at our MPO out in the Southern California area, and I was looking at the economic development strategy that's developed here at is it the MR? What's the MPO? Is anybody from the MPO here regionally? No? We'll get into that. But I pulled this from some of your websites just about where your early opportunity zone actions have generated around, and one thing really stuck out at me here is building and marketing a pipeline of reviewed and investable projects. This point here, I don't know if there's the laser pointer, but I think it's that third bullet. I think that's a really key step and shows how far along New Mexico is in really thinking about the broad opportunities here, for pardon the pun, that kind of underline an opportunity zone strategic approach. Just by comparison, what other big states or what other national partners are doing in this. California is still grappling with some of the policy implications around a tax conformity and some of the regulatory streamlining or other supportive incentives But here I think is where we get a little bit more developed on what are some of the key components of this strategy or framework here. Opportunity zones, we helped develop this really intricate and scintillating chart, which is probably hard to follow from where you're sitting, but essentially what this is showing how the private and public cooperation can work in terms of a project pipeline or deal flow. So not just the capital stack there on the right or the funds that go into making a project pencil, but the complementary steps that public actors can take in terms of aligning incentives down there at the bottom left, or easing some regulatory or streamlining provisions to help projects that we want to get through and over the finish line a lot quicker. A state framework approach, not to say that has to follow this exact sequence, but we think will embody any number of these points, whether it be a supportive call for projects that includes technical assistance funds for local opportunity zone prospectus building, taking a look at state tax policy from aligning incentives and other complementary aspects that projects can rely on. That third from the top, they identify the state and local regulatory OZ project inhibitors, those being the kind of the streamline, like in California, for example, we have really strong environmental protection provisions that add to the project entitlement aspect of a project, which adds risk to and uncertainty to a certain project prospectus. So those are just some things to keep in mind. I pulled this off of the mid-region MPO in terms of their economic development key industry supports for opportunity zones, and this is how we can take a look to see what we would want the landscape of opportunity zones to support in terms of key industries. Like for example, I'll just reference California again, in terms of that fifth point, film, arts, and entertainment. I think California spends about $330 million in tax incentives in order to incentivize film production throughout the state. Key manufacturing levels, like what is the landscape of opportunity zones around New Mexico and some of its key economic regions, what are they positioned to help support in terms of advanced manufacturing and other key industry drivers. And here is where I think we can get a little bit of help in terms of creating that from a role of philanthropies. This is from Bruce Katz, who used to work at HUD, but he kind of laid out what he thought was a good deployment and cooperation nexus with foundations for community support, and even helping to potentially fund some of the technical assistance aspects there. And in terms of those assets that are here in New Mexico, I would look at some of the ones that here that easily came up, especially the Santa Fe Community Foundation, Albuquerque Community Foundation, and especially education assets. You know, you hear a lot about you know, the next Silicon Valley of, you know, fill in the blank, but what's really driving a lot of this knowledge-based or skills-based economic development is really leveraging the assets around education. Those assets like at University of New Mexico, New Mexico State, the Science and Technology Center that I passed by yesterday, how we can drive a startup culture around some of those place-based ideas. Totally lost my train of thought there. Here what we put forth is just a few case studies that I pulled from around the country that aren't necessarily opportunity zones, but bring in a few different aspects of that incentive or deal flow framework. This is a redevelopment project that occurred here that leveraged a few state-based incentives. In the city of Riverside in California, they're looking at doing a whole innovation district around our university, around the state university there. So that's, how do we leverage startups and capture engineers so that they're innovating and developing locally, and so you can capture more of that economic opportunity. I think there's tremendous opportunity in an opportunity zone perspective to do that here and around the state. Again, this is a local-driven case study at a city level in California that is more rural, that is disconnected a bit from the coastal economic boom, and they're taking a much broader look at how they want to reposition their downtown as an economic driver, and what they're willing to streamline and position in order to get that done. From a housing standpoint, a housing action plan is a really good strategy to accelerate housing. The city of Santa Rosa in California, in response to the fires that they had that impacted a lot of that city, they were forced to take a look at how they can reprioritize housing development in terms of getting projects built quicker. Again, I think this is something that could be a structural component of opportunity zone framework. Just a random sampling here of what other states are trying to take a look at from a streamlining standpoint in terms of red tape reduction or environmental quality streamlining for qualifying projects and opportunity zones. Again, more housing priorities and more supporting housing policies. Tax-based incentives that states are looking at up into like partial and full conformity of conforming state tax law with the federal standards. Intentional job-based and job creation business formation strategies. Other tax-based incentives for rural areas in specific. Just a continuation of some of those tax-based incentives. Lots of pairing incentives, and I pulled a few here that New Mexico's already set up in terms of investment tax credits for manufacturers, as we referenced earlier. High wage jobs, tax credits. Obviously, you could look to pair those in qualified opportunity zones. More rural jobs tax credits for business formation. And this is where we get to ask questions about this. Excuse the title up there on the left, it's a little colorblind. It should say the blue and green economy for emerging innovation clusters. But this is where we get to posit the question to the room to say, what do we want to have happen in some of these key areas around the state, using some of the framework that we just went through, whether that be energy and renewable energy transmission or production. Oklahoma, I think, a few years ago was looking at creating the nation's largest wind corridor. I think that was stopped for any number of reasons, but there's no reason that we couldn't look at a really broad project that does a lot of that here. Other parts of the region that could leverage different water strategies for innovation cluster or renewable energy. But that is hopefully a good survey of how we think an opportunity zone framework can lead to a much broader place-based investment conversation, one that really hinges on local and state leaders, putting the proverbial shoulder to the wheel, and just taking a more intentional aspect around long-term thinking around economic and community development. But I'm not sure what our timing is at, Joanna, but I'd be glad to take questions or move on to. Okay.
Any questions?
Speak up loud.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that a lot of these communities are identified by the Department of Treasury as qualified for tax incentives or opportunity zone funds. What else can you tell us about the role that the Treasury has to play in identifying these opportunity zones, and if they receive the funding from the Department of Treasury?
Right. So all the opportunity zones, I believe, were chosen by state governors.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, what's the process for identifying an opportunity zone?
Yeah.
And how do they receive funding, or if they're receiving funding from the U.S. Treasury?
Yeah, they're receiving funding from the U.S. Treasury, and just if you can elaborate more on the role that the Department of Treasury has in this.
Yeah, so the department, to that latter part of the question, the Treasury is setting up monetary policy just about how the tax credit will apply in terms of the deferment of capital gains over a period of time, up until 10 years. The opportunity zones themselves were chosen by state governors after the passage of the tax bill in 2017. Those are locked in, and in order to expand those or modify it, Congress would have to open up that process for solicitation, is my understanding.
And we'll go into a little deeper dive to that towards the end.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.